Okay, good evening and welcome to our latest PCS DVLA members meeting. I'm Fran Heathcote. I'm the president of PCS, and joining me tonight will be, following the usual formula, your chair, Sarah Evans, and our General Secretary, Mark Sawatka. So just by way of opening remarks, obviously it's a little while since we've all met, and since then we've clearly had the ballot result, which, whilst it was an overwhelming yes vote, was it quite clearly we didn't hit the 50% threshold, and people will be well aware of the implications of that. So whilst that's disappointing, I think it's fair to say we're far from sort of down and out. There's lots and lots of things that we can now do. So this evening is very much about what we need to do to take things forward, given the result we've had, but also given the strength of feeling amongst members and the continuing risks posed by COVID-19. I want to just start off by reading out a message of support that's come in this week from the MP John Ashworth, who says, "I want to express my support for the workers who are striking at the DVLA. It's devastating to see a spike in COVID cases and sadly an individual passing away. Employers need to step up and make sure that situations like this don't happen. Over the last year, we've seen how important it is to have COVID secure measures in place and how essential they are to reducing the spread of the virus. Employers must make sure they are practicing this so that their employees feel safe and comfortable in the workplace. Throughout the pandemic, I've repeatedly called on the government for proper sick and isolation pay for all of our workers and for strong ventilation systems. I can assure you that I will continue to do this, and I will be your voice in Parliament. I support you and I stand with you. Best wishes." So I just thought it was worth reading that out, because there's no doubt that there is still a huge amount of support for members at the DVLA in Swansea in terms of the issues you face. And clearly, as the MP John Ashworth says there, you know, we're all entitled to feel safe at work, and employers have a responsibility to ensure that their staff feel safe. And clearly we continue to receive concerns from a number of members around safety implications at the site. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah. As I say, Sarah, your branch chair, Sarah Evans, and Sarah will take you through a little bit of what's been going on since we met last. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. So as Fran has mentioned, the main reason for the meeting tonight is for us to share with you what we now do following the ballot result last week. But firstly, I want to thank all of the members who did vote and those who encouraged their colleagues to vote as well. Over 1,000 DVLA staff voted for industrial action over health and safety. So despite Julie's message that falling below the 50% turnout means the site is safe, we know the truth on the ground with that. I know emotions have been running high on the Facebook page, and I can assure you that no post has been approved that would in any way single out someone. We've always provided... Sorry, my screen has gone off. There we are. So we've always approved all posts that have been submitted to the page, both good and bad. And we don't plan on stopping that, but we are unique in the way that we do this. Most pages like ours will either only post the positive comments or not allow any posts at all aside from the ones that they make. So I hope we can all bear that in mind, as that's not something that we want to do with our page. And as I've said many times, we answer the posts there in our own time outside of our jobs, and we do them as quickly as we can, but that can sometimes lead to delays. But the date and time that you see a post appear is the date and time that we approve it, not the time that is submitted. So this doesn't mean that your post has been ignored. We work from the bottom up, so it's just that there were posts submitted before yours. So now on to discuss the ballot. And the PCS members at the DVLA voted for strike action with a margin of 79%. I do apologise, my laptop has gone again. So that was, as I said earlier on, over 1,000 of our members voting to take strike action. Now, sadly, our ballot did not reach the 50% threshold required by anti-trade union laws, but we remain determined in our fight. Now, I know the result will be very disappointing for all members who are watching the COVID.
Sarah, I don't know if you're aware that I don't know if we've lost you or you've suddenly cut out. Okay, just whilst we're waiting for Sarah to come back, if I can just make it clear that if people have questions, they should direct them via the admins and they will be filtered through to me so that we can take as many of those after we've heard from our speakers. And if you're not able to use the chat facility in order to send your questions to the admins, there is a number you can text. If you've got a pen handy, I'll just get you to jot that number down. That number is 07789 625 334. So that's 07789 625 334, and we will see if we can get Sarah back. Otherwise, we may need to move on and come back. So the number's also been put, if you can see the chat but you can't use the chat, the number's in the chat facility as well. Okay, any sign of Sarah? I mean, if it's helpful, I might just, you know, I'm sure you're very aware of the ballot result, but as Sarah said, it was a 79% vote in favour of industrial action. So that's nearly 1,000 members, but on a 39.6% turnout. And as you will be well aware, under anti-trade union legislation introduced by the Conservatives, you cannot take industrial action if less than 50% of those eligible to vote cast their vote, which is why it's always so important, you know, however you decide to vote, that members are encouraged to cast a vote, and that at least gives us a mandate then for taking any action that we need to take. I will bring, if we don't get Sarah back in a minute, I will move on and bring Mark in, but if I can just let you know that you know, our plans going forward. The branch committee met almost as soon as we got the ballot result, and are planning a period of quite sustained pressure on DVLA management about using letters and contacts to the head of the DFT, the civil service, the cabinet office, including to Michael Gove, and at the same time ramping up political pressure, but through our PCS parliamentary group. So you've probably heard us talk about the parliamentary group before. It's a cross party, if you like, group of MPs that raise issues in Parliament on behalf of PCS, and a number of our MPs have agreed to take questions forward on our behalf around those issues. We've got a number of what we would call friendly MPs that are going to do that on our behalf, including to the chair of the Transport Select Committee. And obviously the pressure that we're putting on is to make it absolutely clear that should no agreement on health and safety be forthcoming, we do not rule out further targeted balloting and subsequent industrial action. So what's clear is there are areas of the DVLA that still feel very strongly in terms of industrial action, and it may well be that we would seek to ballot members again. But here is Sarah back, so I'm going to get you to try again, Sarah. I've been time filling whilst you've been having your technical difficulties, and all I've really done is given the ballot result and said that we're continuing the pressure via both the letters that we're sending, but also the PCS parliamentary group. So do you want to pick up where you left off?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Fran. I have connected on my mobile, so I don't know how good it's going to be, but we'll give it a try. So carrying on with where I left off, we've been increasingly concerned with the number of cases on site and the rate at which they arise in. We currently have 125 cases this month alone, and our total now of running cases is 1,269 on site. And in total, yet every meeting we have with HR, the battle to get them to see the figures as a problem is just unbelievable. We constantly battle with them every meeting. We hear excuses that someone has been to the supermarket or out for food, so it is therefore nothing to do with the agency. We don't believe this at all. Just because someone went out on Saturday and then tested positive on Tuesday doesn't mean that they caught it from the pub or the shop. Given the incubation period, they more than likely caught it days before they went to a public place. And yes, I know some of you will think that we can't prove that, and we can't, but neither can the DVLA prove it was caught off-site either. So regardless of where they caught COVID, it is the DVLA's responsibility to do all they can to minimise the spread of the virus, and we know that they are just not doing this. So what should an employer who has had the worst workplace COVID outbreak in the UK do? Well, ignoring the issue is definitely not one of them. If we had a mandate, and I'm not talking about a mandate to strike, just a mandate that was over the 50% threshold, or even a mandate to take action short of strike, we would in all likelihood have had the agreement signed off last week, which would have ensured that things cannot happen on site without consultation and a time period in between us being informed of things happening and the go live date to allow for this consultation to happen. Instead, we've just been ignored. You may be aware that on Thursday last week, there were 10 cases in the Crucible. We then find out that teams from the Crucible are due to move over to the main contact centre building from yesterday. So we immediately raised this with HR and urged them to stop these moves. On Friday, there was another case in the Crucible. So that's 11 cases in less than 10 days, where there's roughly around 100, 110 staff in the building each day. Our pleas were ignored and the staff moves went ahead. We can now just watch and wait to see what impact this will have in the main contact centre building. This is a perfect example of what we could have stopped if we had the turnout to pass the 50% threshold. Imagine what we would be faced with if the very ministers that introduced this rule had to abide by them themselves. Having read Julie's message on iPoint yesterday, it made me realise why we are in the mess that we are in with COVID. Our CEO professes to building is safe because we lost the ballot. I mean, really, a ballot making a safe workplace. It's nothing that I would now not expect of our CEO, a CEO who has no interest in hearing from her staff. If she was, we would all be given the opportunity to comment on these now totally pointless messages that we get from her regularly. So no matter what is said and done, we are now in a position that we didn't want to be in, but that's okay because we can adapt and we can move on. We may have fallen short for the ballot threshold, but we are still in dispute with the agency. Following the results last week, your branch executive committee met and we discussed at length what would happen next. So we have given ourselves this week and next to ramp up the political pressures on the government and get them back around the table and sign an agreement that will bring this dispute to an end. This agreement has no money or time element in it. It is purely a health and safety agreement. Now, given that we have heard many times Via and Chaps both say that money and time element were the sticking points, why are they then not back around the table with us? I can tell you why. They don't care. They don't care about our health and safety at work. They don't want to have to come to us before any changes are made. They want to do them and do them regardless of the consequences. Those making the decisions to increase numbers across all sites don't have to sit there watching people around them catch COVID. They don't have the app ping almost weekly telling them that they've been in close contact with someone who's now tested positive. And they don't make the absolutely heartbreaking decisions to stay away from vulnerable family members. Julie doesn't have phone calls with people in tears because they're having to make decisions about coming into work or going off on sick so that they can care for elderly family members. I take them phone calls. I read the emails and the messages from you and have at times been in tears myself reading them because the situation that our employer is putting us in. And I can promise you all that we won't give up this fight. We will continue to fight this shambolic senior management for each and every one of you. And by the end of next week, if we have not made any progress with our political pressures, we as a branch executive committee will again meet, and that meeting will be to discuss the ballot going forward. We will discuss which areas we will ballot and plan our approach for the next battle. Because as the saying goes, they may have won this battle, but the war continues, and we are in this for the duration. So thank you, Fran.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And you know, I think that's a really positive message to send. And I just want to read out a couple of messages that have come in, actually. Donna says, I haven't got any questions, but I just want to say a big thank you. And Sue says, please congratulate Sarah and the team for all the hard work that they put into this. As a union member, I really appreciate what they've done for us. Love you, Sarah. So there you go, Sarah. That hopefully makes you feel better, and hopefully your IT will enable you to stay with us. So without any further ado, I am going to bring in now Mark Mark Swatka, our General Secretary, and Mark will give you a bit of the bigger picture. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks very much, Fran, and big thanks to everyone who's joined us at the meeting. A meeting that we know is being held with many, many people really devastated by the ballot results. That has been made all the worse, I think, in people's perception because of Julie's ridiculous message that Sarah's covered yesterday. So what I want to do, Fran, is just remind ourselves what we've achieved and pick up from what Sarah said as to about where we go next. Because with Julie's message that said it was never about winning or losing, she may as well have just gone on to say, but however, I think I've won. And that tells us a lot about Julie's mentality and how badly she's judged this entire situation from the end. And I say that because everyone on this call is a PCS member. Majority of people, I have no doubt, will be working at the DVLA for many years to come, probably lives in the area, is committed to what they do. And therefore, what we're laying the seeds for here is to ensuring that this can be somewhere that people are proud to work, that they get paid properly, that they're treated with dignity and respect, and that actually the DVLA is not seen as an outrider for bad practice in the civil service, but is actually seen as a good employer. I don't know what Julie's plans are, but I do know that she has marked herself out as, without doubt, I think one of, if not the worst leader of any public sector organisation that we represent. Someone who has not only misled a parliamentary select committee, but has done everything possible during the long, hard months that you've had to endure to not bring this to a satisfactory conclusion for all concerned, but has been determined to be seen to prevail whatever the cost. Now, whatever you describe that as, that is pretty shoddy leadership, because it ends you up, in theory, in charge of an organisation, but in practice, presiding over an organisation that's reputation has been trashed in the public domain, that has been trashed throughout Whitehall, and who we all know has thousands of staff in it who have no confidence at all in the senior management. Now, if that's your perception of a victory, I don't know what a defeat would look like. And that should make us determined for all of us moving forward who want the DVLA to be a decent place to work where you are treated properly, to redouble our efforts to commit ourselves to the fight that is needed to get it. I personally do not think Julie or the current senior management team are the people who should remain in that organisation long term if there's to be any hope of the DVLA taking its place as a reputable part of the civil service. And to do that, it's got an awful long way to go. So whilst it's understandable that when everyone saw the ballot result, people's hearts probably sunk, what is important for us to do at times like this, I think, is to reflect where we've come from, where we are now, to reflect that we would not have achieved the many things that we've achieved if it hadn't been for your brave action, but to then say to ourselves, yes, we did fall short at that hurdle, but as Sarah said, that is one hurdle in a long race. And the point is to get up now and ensure that we see this through. And I think that we have a plan to ensure that we can bring that about. But it has to start, I think, with being absolutely clear that what you've endured is unacceptable and that the management of the DVLA should hang their heads in shame. And they did not even have the dignity yesterday to put out a staff message that sought to unite its workforce. They sought to exacerbate the division and rub people's noses in what Julie somehow thinks is a victory. Now, I went to a comprehensive school in Merthyr and I came from Aberdeen, and I tell you that I was quite rough. But I tell you what, something that my mother and father told me at the time is that if people treat you badly and if they bully you, then if you keep your head down, that bad behaviour continues. So if Julie thinks rubbing your noses in it is the way that she prevails, we should say to ourselves, we are more determined than ever to ensure that that does not prevail and that we get the justice that we deserve being in the DVLA itself. So cast our minds back. Before you did what you did, there was an unregulated move to force people back into work, to ignore the fact you had the biggest COVID outbreak anywhere in the UK, to have a proposition that basically said we will do as little as we can and hope that we get through it. And frankly, we don't really care about the staff. That's where you started. The moment you decided you weren't having it, the moment your local branch, through the existing reps at the time and now through the new ones that have come forward and the advocates and the brilliant members who've come on these meetings on Tuesdays and Thursday night, The moment you decided you weren't having it was the beginning of, yes, a tough period ahead, but actually sowing the seeds for getting to a much better place. And you are a long way down that route. So remind yourselves, if you hadn't done what you had done, there wouldn't have been 400 vulnerable staff told to go home in March because of the union doing what it's done. There wouldn't have been 300 desks removed because they were breaking social distancing regulations if it hadn't been for what the union had done. You wouldn't have a bonus scheme that has ended up distributing the money more or less to everyone at over 700 quid. You'd have had a bonus scheme that would have gone to a small band of the highest performers that could even have been used to penalise people who went on strike. And you wouldn't have had a situation, without doubt, that hundreds, if not thousands of you were kept safe at critical times during the desperate period of the second wave in particular, when over 1,000 people a day were dying, when our hospitals were overflowing. You kept people safe and families safe, and probably ultimately, if not saved lives for some, certainly stopped many people suffering from COVID and long COVID, because you weren't at work, you were on strike, or you were forcing them to do things that they did not want to do. You should be proud of every single one of those achievements and know the fact that none of them would have happened had you not taken the stand that you took. And for that alone, let alone the fact you've recruited hundreds of new members, and now the DVLA is known within the entire British trade union movement as somewhere where the workforce have got guts and are prepared to stand up against bad treatment, none of that would have been achieved. We shouldn't forget that when it comes to the moment of reflecting that we wouldn't like to be where we are now with this ballot result. And I think it's important that all of us reflect on how much has been achieved up until now. But of course, what Julie and Grant Shapps cynically exploited was the fact that they knew that under what has been described as the most restrictive trade union laws anywhere in Europe, they knew that a combination of forcing you to reballot, a combination that you still have thousands of people working from home, a combination that knowing that in the first ballot we narrowly got over the threshold, they cynically did not do what a leader should do, which is go to the workforce and say, this is what I'm doing, vote on whether you think I'm right or not. What Julie and her team did was the utter coward's solution. They didn't appeal to you to back them by voting no to industrial action. They took an unprecedented move to exploit what the law was designed to do, was to tell people to boycott the ballot itself. Just think about that for a minute. The government introduced these laws because they said they wanted unions to belong to their members and they wanted members to have a right to vote. Yet here is Julie, the most senior representative of the management, essentially working for the government, telling people, I don't want the union to be given back to its members. I actually don't want you to vote. That's why Julie's strategy for a while, I think, has clearly been to hope that with all the pressures you face, she would hope that 51% of people or more would not vote. Now, think about that for a minute. She's actually saying she doesn't care about the other 49%, and she doesn't care that over 1,000 of you have voted for strike action or action short of a strike. After a year of what you've been through, anyone else would think, oh my God, what is going on here? Yet Julie decides that that is enough for her to conclude that you believe this is a safe workplace. It is the bizarrest, I think, most disgraceful interpretation of a situation you could wish to see. She knows you don't think it's a safe workplace. What she's really doing is saying, I didn't want people to vote and I managed to get enough people not to do so. Now, we should be big enough to recognize that when that ballot result came out, we were desperately disappointed. Julie was pleased. But that's because it demonstrates a short-term thinking about the problems of the DVLA, which has bedeviled this organization since the moment you rose your head over the parapet. All they think about is tomorrow and getting through tomorrow at any price whatsoever. They don't care about next year or the year after or your futures or your family's future. They want to get through today and they want to get through tomorrow. Well, I think as Sarah said that, we got news for Julie, which is if she thinks the declaration of that ballot result means she's got through today and tomorrow and the next 6 months, she's making the most catastrophic misjudgment once again of where people stand. Because I can tell you that in the organization I lead, if I had a majority of my workforce voting for a strike, but narrowly failing to get over the threshold, I wouldn't consider that a victory. I'd consider that to be a bit of a crisis. And I'd ask myself why so many of my own staff had voted for industrial action. What does Julie do? She says, it's not about winning or losing, but by the way, I've won, and this must mean you all think it's safe. So the way I look at that is, for anyone who didn't vote, for anyone who perhaps hasn't been persuaded, for anyone who, when we had the last meeting and we posed it as the question to ask yourself is, do you trust Julie and her team, or do you trust yourselves? She has answered that question with bells on. Because anyone who believes they can trust the senior management team, who are reveling in the fact that most people voted for a strike but a majority didn't vote, is not trustworthy. They are a person who does not have your best interests at heart and has pursued from the get-go an outcome that does not want her to sign an agreement that she feels would show that she's been forced to do it by reaching an agreement with the union. Leaders of quality recognize that compromise and agreement is a good thing where there's usually something in it for everyone. The worst possible leaders pursue a strategy of division and getting their way at any costs, and they don't care the consequences. It's well known as a scorched earth strategy. So if Julie has a scorched earth strategy, we now need, I think, to respond. And I just want to conclude, Fran, for people by being upfront. I mean, we're not those union leaders who tell people it's sunny if you can all look out the window and see it's raining. But let's be clear, we did not want to have a meeting tonight where we hadn't got over the threshold. We wanted a meeting where we had won the ballot because we believed, as Sarah said, there would have been an agreement signed within days. Because the true cynical nature of what's gone on is, as Boris Johnson put it in the Brexit debate, there is an oven-ready agreement, right? There is an agreement that we've all been party to, that Julie knows is there, that the DFT, the Cabinet Office and PCS have all been discussing, that, as Sarah has said, would have given you some confidence that you don't have to trust the senior management team. You've got an agreement that you can trust. And the only reason they didn't sign it is because they wanted to wait for the ballot result and hope to get this result. Now, if Julie was true to her words, and Julie truly didn't think this was about winners and losers, she would now be coming to us today or tomorrow and say, well, you've had the ballot, we all need to move on together, let's sign this agreement and let's try and work together for the best interests of the DVLA. Not a sniff. They haven't come back to us over the last 3 weeks. They're keeping their head down. They don't want to sign an agreement, not because the agreement is terrible for them, but because they actually do not want something that regulates the way they behave. They want the unfettered ability to do what they want when they want at any consequence. Now that, I think, should inspire us to say absolutely no way. And we should say to ourselves that we've achieved so much because we stood together. We've had a temporary setback. But as Sarah has said, the real interesting thing about the vote and the consultative ballot is there are large parts of the DVLA where people are absolutely clear that they feel badly treated and they're prepared to take industrial action. And what we need to now do is to make the best efforts we can in the next 2 weeks to get the agreement over the line. That's what we want. We want an agreement, and we want to try to move back to a normality that exists everywhere else in the civil service. Not just because this agreement's important, but in a year's time, we don't want to be holding a meeting where you're the only part of the civil service where you can't have access to hybrid working, where people can work from home some of the time if they want, which everybody else is benefiting from, but the DVLA don't think that suits them in Swansea. We don't want it to be a position where everywhere else in the civil service, we can make progress, but we come to you and you still have the worst sick absence trigger points anywhere in the Department for Transport. We don't want to be in a position where in a year's time, if you work in the contact centre or driver's medical or any part of the DVLA, you feel your work is stressful, you don't get support, you're overworked, you're understaffed, and you think there's a bit of a bullying culture. All we want is for the DVLA, you, to be able to work in the conditions that exist in most other parts of the civil service, where agreements is the norm, not the exception, disputes are the exception, not the rule, and actually the union and its members are treated with some form of respect. So if that's our aim and aspiration, it is, yes, getting this health and safety agreement over the line, but it is also recognizing in all the surveys we've done over the year or so of this dispute, we know there are other underlying issues that people feel very, very strongly about the DVLA, which often they get away with because they just think that they can just get on with what they want to do. Strength of a workplace from a union's perspective is not that you get everything you want, but that most people there believe that ultimately the place they work in is reasonable and the employer behaves reasonably because things are done by agreement and consensus where we can have it. So I'll finish with this, Fran. Yes, we've had a setback, but I salute every member who voted, including the members who voted no, because being in a union is about taking part. I understand why some people may have been taken in by Julie saying, let's get it all over with, don't vote. And I understand some people may now regret that that's the decision that they took. I also understand that there are some people who feel safe, maybe working from home, or actually don't think it affects them. But what I hope all of us can agree is, for a strong future for the DVLA, you need to know that whatever bit of the DVLA you work in, whatever your grade and whatever your job, you should work in an environment that we can feel is fair, not one that currently exists. So where do we go? Very briefly, as Sarah has said, I have written today to Rupert McNeill, who's essentially the Chief Operating Officer in the Civil Service, setting out a whole series of reasons why the Cabinet Office must intervene urgently to get that agreement signed. On the basis, as Sarah has said, there are no reasons why it can't be signed. All the other issues are out of the way. We've raised it with our parliamentary group and we're asking people in Parliament to raise it. Today, we've had an approach from within the Welsh Assembly government itself to offer any assistance that can be offered in order to try to get the agreement done. So let's give that a go. Let's give it a go to keep the pressure up, keep the high ground, and get Julie to sign the agreement. And if Julie won't sign the agreement, I'm going to make a challenger to her now, because usually after these meetings, she seems to know exactly what's being said. So here's your challenge, Julie. If you are listening to anything in this meeting, if you won't sign this agreement tomorrow, come and tell us why. Tell us why you don't think that agreement is needed. What is in it, the agreement, that you don't think should be there? Why do you think the workplace is safer without an agreement than a workplace that has an agreement? If you can explain that to us, we'd like to listen. But don't sit in your office, tell us everyone thinks it's safe, when you know that there are thousands of people who don't think that, and particularly who know that there is an agreement to be signed. If those 2 weeks do not get us to where we want, the pledge that we're making on behalf of the National Union is working with your branch committee and your reps and yourselves, that we are absolutely prepared to not just move this into a new phase, including ballots if needs be, including ballots of targeted areas where we think that that is the best place to start. And if we feel that we need to do that and also ensure that there are other things that we're asking them to do, we will do that. The union is here to represent and serve what you need in Swansea. But we equally make this commitment to you, is that if we do get the agreement, we don't walk away and say that's done, let's forget about the DVLA for 10 years. We will then work with you to ensure that the other things we need over time, we're here to help you get. But here's the final scenario that I'll just leave you to think about. Let's assume Julie doesn't sign the agreement. Let's assume that Julie doesn't succumb to the pressure, or that the Cabinet Office don't force her to sign. You should know this: whatever tactics you decide moving forward, your union is here to support you, and we commit tonight that whether that is further ballots of targeted areas, further political pressure, further campaigning, we are in it for the long haul. We are not in it because we only care about tomorrow. We're in it because we care about tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, and the next decade. And we want properly resourced, well-paid, decent public sector jobs in Swansea, and we want them for the long term. And we want to be able to say, all of us, if our family went to work in the DVLA, we know it's a good place to work. And sadly, under Julie's leadership, that is not something we can say at the moment. So stay strong. We'll do everything we can in the next 2 weeks. And if we don't prevail, let's go on to build a campaign that can force them to give us the agreement we need.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. And hopefully people have found that very useful by way of an update. And, you know, quite clearly, it was really important, I think, to take a bit of time over that and for you to hear that there's absolutely no way that we're giving up on any of this. If anything, our resolve has to be stronger as a result of what's happened. So there are a number of questions which I'll try and group together as much as possible. The first couple, Sarah, are probably for yourself, and there's a couple of questions which I'll read out, which cover a theme really, and that's home working. So Robia says, what does it mean for people who are home working? Will this mean that with the rising cases, management will still consider bringing everybody back, even though government advice is to work from home if you still can? And Laura says, how can CAEG staff who volunteered to work from home in the recent expression of interest not be allowed to go home? Welsh Government advice is still work from home, but there are still staff on site who could fully do their job at home. So I don't know if you've got any initial thoughts in terms of any of that, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, as it currently stands now, we know that those currently working at home are going to stay there until at least March next year. From the way the DVLA have handled bringing staff back up to this point, then I'm pretty confident when I say yes, they won't care if there's rising cases. At that point, they will still look at bringing you back, and I think they may even consider doing it sooner if the social distancing guidelines were reduced. As for the CAEG staff, I mean, my understanding is that you were given your laptops and then in the very last minute we're told, sorry, you're not going home, to work from home from next week on. I still haven't had an answer as to why that has happened, but we have got a meeting, I think it's in the next 10 days or so, with the senior management of CAEG, and that's one of the questions that we're going to be asking them, what happened, because the advice is work from home if you can. The agency obviously believed that they could work from home and give them the systems to do it, give them the laptops to do it. So what is the point in people having laptops that are just stuck in a locker or stuck at home when they have to come in and sit on a desktop and do their job every day? It just doesn't make sense. And it again just goes to show how little consideration there is to the staff that have to come in every day, even when there is no need for them any longer.
Okay, thank you. The next comments are really, I think, comments rather than anything needs a response. But Christopher says, I want to see a ballot for Julie's resignation. I do not feel safe working under her. And Carice says, when will DVLA ever publicly stand up for its staff, issue a statement saying we do not tolerate public abusing of our staff, that we're working, etc. Julie's latest comments regarding be kind was like a smack in the face to me. Thank you. So, there's obviously quite strong views in terms of all of this. Mark, I'm going to read out a couple of comments which you might want to respond to, and they're slightly different, but they're both in relation to what's happened with the ballot. So Gordon says, in his view, that DVLA and DFT led PCS up the garden path, not once, not twice, but 3 times. PCS should have gone for all-out strike action after the first agreement was torn up by government ministers. We were taken for fools. But then Byron says, in hindsight, the ballot campaign concentrated on the continuing strike action, not the need to obtain the required numbers to vote to continue with negotiations with management, thereby using the mandate to take action up to and including strike action. Given this, what is the view of the union and what we have learned from the campaign? Our union leaders and reps deserve a medal for the work they've carried out during this dispute. Well done to Sarah and all of the team. So clearly, we always need to learn lessons, don't we, from any situation. So given what's happened, how would we respond to Gordon in terms of that?
So I think just a couple of quick things to say. I mean, first of all, can I just agree with the comment about how brilliant the reps have been?
Yeah.
I mean, the work that's been done from the get-go in the workplace, from the branch office, from people working from home, traveling around doing things virtually, I think has been really inspirational. And I think it's one of the things not to underestimate. That's why we have to kick on from here to ensure that all of that, make sure that we can still, go on to bigger and better things. So I think the reps have been brilliant. So on the first part of the question, did they take us for mugs? I mean, I don't think they took us for mugs, and obviously all-out strike was always an option, looking as to how best to prosecute the dispute. But when we went through each and every one of those decisions, I think we took what looked like the best decision at any given time, and that required us at some point calling everybody out who was required to be in work. Then we had the targeted action. And these things are always a balance, because obviously the thing about an all-out strike, it's the biggest weapon you have. It's the hardest to sustain. because in an all-out strike of thousands of people, the union would not be able to pay strike pay for an indefinite basis, and therefore, it is all or nothing. And there are times when an all-out strike is definitely the thing to do, but in a dispute of this nature, I think the tactics that we took were undoubtedly effective in terms of the backlogs that built up. But what I think that it showed was Grant Shapps' intervention meant there was also some politics involved of people stopping an agreement when there was one to be had. And if the dispute continues in terms of a further ballot, then clearly, again, the union's position is that we would want to support what comes from you as members and reps as the most effective way to take that forward. In terms of what do we learn from the ballot itself? Well, one thing I think we can all learn is because of the nature of the law, and I keep coming back to the point, there isn't anything else that requires a 50% threshold. But police and crime commissioners have been elected in Britain on a 2% turnout. If you look at local government elections, nobody applies a threshold. It was done deliberately to make life difficult. And what makes it more difficult is the government will not even concede that you should be able to vote online as well as in post. And one of the things I think is interesting, and I raised it at the TUC today, is that the government has committed to have a pilot of online balloting. They committed in 2017 and they've refused to do it. If you look at your consultative ballot, it had a 10% higher turnout than the actual ballot itself. And that speaks volumes for me. It actually tells us that, online as well as postal, it makes it harder. So it's also the case that I think that one of the things that we should learn with a dispute around health and safety, then it's what this dispute showed us is many people felt incredibly strongly about it, would prepared to and wanted to take strike action. Other people didn't quite feel that they were quite unsafe. There was different views going on at any one time because it's a complex situation. And the management's attitude, rather than try to solve the problem, was to try to work on the basis that they just needed to get half the people to a point where they wouldn't vote one way or another. The lesson I think we have to learn from that is if you're a member of the union, we need to encourage a culture amongst everyone. Is by being a member of the union, I think comes some responsibility, and it's a responsibility to us all, which is that you have every right to be in favour or against. That's what a union is about. But actually, people should participate, because the idea that abstentions can now wreck everything is doing what the government always wanted it to do. So one of the things that I think that we should think about moving forward is when we commit to a ballot, whether that is targeted, and let's be clear, we know already, and I think Sarah and the BEC know this, we could run another ballot tomorrow that would be a significant ballot in parts of the DVLA, and we would romp past the threshold and we would have a mandate to take industrial action. So, let's be clear, there are large parts of the branch where the union is very strong and people are still prepared to take action. So I think that the ultimate lesson, I think, is there's no shortcut to keep encouraging people to come to meetings, read the literature, and ultimately to vote. And that's what I think we've got to keep working towards and building, and also explore, and this is my final point moving forward, I think, is that sometimes focusing on certain sections of the membership is a good thing to do, because where you have strength and you can win, actually where you win can then be repeated and rolled out, and more people will actually see what we've achieved. In this particular dispute, because it dragged on for so long, I think that duly cynically exploited the length of time, vaccinations, a lot of people sort of, who were concerned about the abuse that people are getting on the phones and everything else, to just hope that enough people wouldn't vote. So, as I said at the beginning, Fran, as I set up it really nicely, this is one stage of a battle. It's not over. We're in the midst of trying to get to a better place. And I think you are much stronger today than you were 2 years ago. There is no question at all. And that's what we've got to build on now moving forward.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, Sarah, the next question is about unvaccinated staff. And whilst you obviously can't answer for them, it might be interesting if there's anything that's been said by management about all this. So the question comes from Tracy, and Tracy asked, why is it fair that unvaccinated staff get to isolate on work's time with pay, yet if you're genuinely ill, HR are on your back? Surely with the 2-metre rule and masks, all staff should be safe. I think the majority are contracting COVID outside work. How long will unvaccinated staff be given paid leave for? And how do we know they're not vaccinated? It seems very unfair to me. So as I said, I don't expect you to comment on behalf of unvaccinated staff, but just whether or not that's ever come up in the discussions that you've been having with the employer.
It hasn't come up in that sort of way, but from my view on this is we have to do whatever we can to keep people safe. And if sending unvaccinated staff home to isolate is what we have to do to keep them safe, then that is something that I would fully support any day of the week. Whether people are vaccinated or not is their own personal choice, but ultimately keeping everyone safe is our aim, whether that is on special leave, whether they isolate, whether they don't. And I know that it's harsh when people have to take sick and hit triggers for, even some people who've still got COVID symptoms after having a negative test. And these are the things that we want to fight. But we can't fight them as a small group of 15, 16 reps. We can fight them if every member gets behind us and supports us to fight them. We'll fight the sick triggers. We have the harshest sick triggers across the civil service. We know that. And we are seeing people now having warnings or attendance meetings because they took more than the 10 days off after testing positive for COVID. And whilst we fight individual battles and, we're very successful as a branch when we do fight these battles, if we all fight it together, then that puts us in a much stronger position to say to the DVLA, we're not going to accept it in exactly the same way as we're not going to accept being told we can't work from home when the civil service aren't. We are on the same level as our civil service colleagues across the board. We aren't the poor relation. So why do we have to suffer for our health and safety, for our sick triggers, and for everything else that puts us at a detriment? But we have to get the members behind us to do it.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Mark, there's a question about the Deloitte report. What's happened about that? Why has the union not used legal means to gain access to it? This may have been the only chance that lower grades have of being able to have blended working. And that question comes from Samantha. Is there any update we can give around the Deloitte report?
Yeah, I can confirm that we are still battling on to get the Deloitte report, and we are using the mechanisms available to us to appeal the decisions not to give them. And I think we have had correspondence today actually reflecting that whilst their initial investigations don't lead them to think the DVLA has committed a criminal offence, they do believe there is a case there that warrants investigation about their failure to give us the report. So whilst this isn't like an overnight thing, that process is still very much in there, and we won't be letting go. I mean, it's essential we get hold of this report. And so the efforts to use the routes open to us are still ongoing.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that update, Mark. Okay, Sarah, Paul says, across the civil service, discussions are taking place concerning hybrid working, i.e. the ability for staff to work at home some of the time and in the workplace at other times. Have the DVLA discussed with you any hybrid working, or have the DVLA discussed with PCS any hybrid working? And I can confirm that level of detail hasn't been discussed at Cabinet Office level, but is that something that's been discussed, at a site level?
It's been mentioned. We know that they're going to be looking at a hybrid way of working. They haven't said yet if that is going to be for every member of staff or if it's just going to be for the non-operational roles and when they start bringing them in. But the detail hasn't been discussed yet, and I think that's because they don't even know it themselves. They started working on a home working policy many months ago. It got to ET level. They weren't very pleased with it, and it seems to have taken a back step. But for me, hybrid working needs to be applicable to everybody. Doesn't matter what job you do, what grade you are, we should all have the option. We know that over the next couple of months there's going to be soft phones added to every laptop and every desktop. So if everybody can then have the ability to have these soft phones on their laptops, there's no reason why members of staff in the contact centre need to be going in to do their job when they can do it just as safely from home, and that applies across the board. So when we do get to the point of discussing in more detail hybrid working, our angle will certainly be that it's hybrid working across the board, not just for those that are currently working from home because of their roles.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, well, look, there's a bulk of questions here all around the ballot and the ballot result. So I'm going to read them out to both of you and then ask either of you if you have any comments, and maybe you want to use that in terms of summing up as well before we bring the meeting to a close. But if I just read them as they're written, Richard says, could we do a questionnaire to find out the reasons why almost 61% of our branch members didn't take part in the ballot? For example, did they agree with what the union were fighting for, but were afraid of ultimately losing their jobs? David says, it's unfortunate that the union is now more divided than ever, as evidenced in the latest ballot. What are the leaders' plans to bring us together? Because a divided union is no union at all. Catherine says, I only wish people use their vote, be it yes or no. I don't want management to win after all the amazing work that the union has done so far. Paul says, was the strike ballot done fairly, and is there the possibility of a reballot as Julie interfered in what is supposed to be a fair and biased judicial ballot process? Judicial ballot process by trying to encourage staff not to return their papers, knowing this was the easiest way to block union action by not getting the turnout that was required. Julie says, a strike action has not been voted for. What happens now? Does this mean that management and Julia Leonard have won? And hopefully what you've heard tonight, Julia, lays some of those fears. And Dean says, can PCS identify what directorates of the agency were mostly underrepresented or had the least votes received in the recent ballot? Maybe the union choice to only strike in elected areas reflected on paying members not voting. A cross-agency all-out strike was probably a better option. Maybe a good idea for PCS to now target pay and pensions as well as the safety issues, as I feel this will help reunite members strongly and still show management that we have a voice. Thank you, Sarah, and to all PCS reps for your very hard work. So I recognise there's quite a range of opinions and comments and questions in there. But Sarah, is there anything you want to respond to in terms of any of that?
Yeah, thank you, Fran. So I think, trying to find out why people didn't vote is a great idea. How we go about doing that is going to be more difficult because we're not allowed to use any internal systems to contact our members about anything to do with a dispute. So, we could do a poll on Facebook or something like that. But I think, we're pretty confident when we know a lot of it was down to the message that Julie sent. And again, it's, like when Catherine said about people not using their vote, we'd love to know what the reason was, if there was any reason, because if they don't agree with the reasons behind the dispute, then, vote but vote no. Because if we're not told what you believe in and what you support, know which way to take things. I let Mark answer about a reballot because of Julie's interference, because I don't know the answer to that one. But what I want to make very, very clear is that Julie has not won. She has not won at all. Julie is in a hell of a mess. Look at the state that the agency is in. Almost, it's no proud thing to sit here and say that the DVLA is in a hell of a mess and we've got backlogs. That to me shows that Julie is crumbling, and the whole agency is crumbling underneath her. And if it wasn't for the dispute, maybe they'd have got rid of her a long time ago, and they can't do it now because it would look as a victory for us. I don't know the reasons that she's still there, but she definitely has not won at all. Over 1,000 members voting to say, that they would strike because they don't feel safe in work. To me, even if just one person doesn't feel safe in the workplace, something is not right with that. And with regards to the areas that we're going to target, we can't find out what areas strongly voted and who didn't, because it's all done anonymous by an external company. But that is something that we have had to think about, is if things don't move on in the next week or two, do we then go to ballot? And I think the way that we will pick an area would be the areas that are being affected the most, because if we can get them areas to ballot and win, we can then do something to keep their members safe. And if that means calling strike action to keep them safe and keep them out of the workplace, we can do that. And, you know, that is going to be part of building up our defences again and getting to the end of this with a signed agreement. And I just want to say one more thing about one of the comments that Gordon made about us being taken for mugs 3 times. That to me is very, very far from the truth. If members think back to the end of May, where the agency told us, we are signing this agreement, it's good to go, call off your strike. We made the decision on that Thursday night, we're not going to call off our strike, we are going to hang on. We are going to wait until this agreement is signed on Tuesday before we call off our strike. That was the best decision that we made during this dispute, because they ripped that up right in front of us. So if anything, we have taken them on the ride, because that was not what they expected us to do at all. They thought they were pulling the wool over our eyes, and we didn't let that happen. So I really do have to disagree with the comment that we've been taken for mugs many, many times. We haven't at all, and we've worked too hard for that to start now. So as I've said, we're going to continue fighting. If members have any suggestions or anything that they feel that we should be doing differently or doing in addition to what we're doing, let us know. Come and tell us, you know, exactly the same as if you want to come on board and give us a hand, the more the merrier, because at the minute it is a massive workload on very few shoulders. We're always open to more people coming in, especially with ideas and opinions that can help us, you know, improve this campaign and move forward with a dispute and get that end agreement as quickly as we possibly can, so that we can keep more people safe.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. And I think that's really well answered. In the chat, one of the PCS staff has put that we need as many people as possible to get involved. Make sure your details are up to date and those of the people you work with. If you're talking to other people, help to recruit any non-members to PCS and contact PCS itself, and just organising at pcs.org.uk if you want more information about any of that. So now I'm going to hand over to Mark. Mark, you know, I recognise I covered quite a lot of ground there with some of those comments and questions, but can you respond in terms of the ballot result and you know what happens?
Yeah, and just to sum up as well, Franz. Yeah, so to just very briefly. On the questions that came in, first of all, about a reballot because of what Julie did may have been illegal. Just to be clear, we did take legal advice on Julie's intervention. And the legal advice is really interesting, because our lawyers told us that it was close to the line legally, but was not unlawful, but, quote, it was morally corrupt. And I think that's a brilliant way of describing what Julie did here, is that it wasn't illegal, but it was immoral. It really was a cowardly act, in my opinion. And the reason it wasn't unlawful is that what the law says is an employer could fall foul of statutory provisions if it sought to subject an employee to a detriment as a consequence of intending to vote in an industrial action ballot, and that this communication didn't do that. In other words, if she said, don't vote, and if you do, we'll do something, is illegal, or even to infer, but just calling on people not to vote doesn't break that legal threshold. And bear in mind, with all these laws, they're stacked against us, as we know. But we did take that advice, and I thought the answer really was quite damning of Julie. On the question of why people didn't vote, look, I mean, I agree with Sarah. I think what we need to do now is, with the branch committee, work forward. We always have the options to do more surveys. If people want to do surveys, you know, we can dig down to get to the bottom of that. But I don't accept that where we are means the union is divided. In fact, I would argue quite the opposite. This vote doesn't tell us the union's divided. It tells us that the people who voted overwhelmingly for action. Lots of people didn't vote, but let's remember, in the very first ballot, we beat the threshold by 8 votes, right? So it's not like we started with a 90% turnout and ended up with a 40%. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves. And the reason for that, and this is why it does link to the question about pay and pensions, Fran, is that in a way you've waged one of the most difficult disputes. In some ways, the arguments have been easy: life and death, the right to be safe at work, the right to be treated properly. They're really strong arguments. That was the core of the dispute. But everybody has a different perception, don't they? Many people work from home. Some people may have been younger, may not have felt any threat. Others would have felt very, very strongly. The vaccination program kicked in. Most people have now been double jabbed. Many people have had boosters. So in some senses, an issue like this, the core that unites us is all for one and one for all. And as Sarah said, if anyone feels unsafe, we should all stick together. But we know that people in different circumstances may sometimes see it differently. That doesn't mean we're divided. It just means that sometimes, unlike a question of pay, where everybody understands if you get a 10% pay rise, you all get the same, is a little bit more difficult. And this comes back, therefore, to the role that the management played, which was so cynical, because they knew that. And what they should have done is try to spend their time addressing the real concerns held by many, rather than just hoping to get to a position where most people maybe not support Julie, but didn't feel strongly enough. And I come back to what our lawyers told us, I think that approach is morally corrupt. It is not a proper way to lead. In terms of the pay and pensions question, I am glad that's come up, because what we're trying to indicate here is that so much has come from what you've done. One of the byproducts, I just think it is worth reminding yourself, it is your action. Paul Williams is on this call, who's the president of the Department for Transport Group. I remember a meeting where he said the action you took had inspired the members that he was also working with, the driving examiners and the DVSA, to feel confident enough to take strike action. Well, the driving examiners had a ballot, 92% for strike, 80% turnout, and the government caved in overnight, right? And therefore, they probably may not have had that ballot had they not looked to you. Sarah spoke to them. Phil had been doing the rounds, a lot of the reps have. Don't rule out you inspired something there. And that was a significant thing, because their victory came at a time where the government used the press to try to rain down on the union and you all sorts of allegations. I was doing radio interviews where we were reading in the Daily Mail that it was because of you and your colleagues in the DVSA that children would not have presents under the Christmas tree. We were getting all sorts of abuse and threats. And in fact, with the driving examiners, the government went as far as to say that if they didn't get what they wanted, the national COVID recovery was in jeopardy. Yet they backed down. And I think the thing for you to work out there, I think, is that your action inspired them. They had a very focused dispute that was around a very clear-cut issue. And coming back to where you stand, we all know what the issues are. Everyone who's come to the meetings knows. But we knew there were some people who just didn't feel enough it affected them. Now, I think that moving forward, two final things to say. One is Sarah's point. If we don't get the agreement over the line, then the branch committee is going to look at how we put further pressure on them. But the additional thing that the union is doing is we have seen that because of the budget, next year in the DVLA, like every PCS member, you face historically the highest single cut in living standards that anyone will have seen in their lifetime. We stand next year by a combination of pay freezes or no funding for pay, overpaying for your pensions, inflation that may rise anything up to 6%, 1.25% rise in your national insurance contributions, meaning most people on this call will be paying an extra £240 next year. That combined means that in reality, we need to get an 8% pay rise just to stand still, right? So the point about paying pensions, the union is committed now to a national campaign. We're talking to other public sector unions as well, designed to say that early next year, if the government do not change some of these policies, and let's remember there'll be people on this call who will have had the universal credit cut. There's tens of thousands of PCS members who've suffered from the universal credit cut as well. We're trying to build a national campaign around paying pensions. And one thing I know is in that national campaign, if you build on what you've done, we should get a higher vote at the DVLA in Swansea than we've ever had in any of our previous national ballots. And we also know that if we're taking national industrial action across the civil service, we could look to the DVLA and know that you would be prepared to come out and take targeted action on behalf of others that would have a real effect on the government, particularly if you were doing that alongside, say, colleagues in job centres or in courts or in other parts of transport. So my real final message really is back to Julie looks at tomorrow, we look at every day and every year ahead. getting better pay, better pensions, defending jobs in Swansea, but working in a safe environment with the underlying thing that locks it all. You go to work, we're not slaves, we go to work and we should be treated with dignity and respect, and people should accept that you do a really important job. I don't think that happens in DVLA in Swansea, and I think that's where we want to get to. So let's stay strong. Let's recognize this is a little setback that none of us wanted. We've achieved a lot, but we are going to achieve a lot more if we stick together. So whatever we choose to do, let's remember those lessons and stick together. But let's hope, final sentence, Fran, is that what Julie does tomorrow is sets aside all her messages, looks in the mirror and says, I know there's an agreement. Why can't I sign that agreement? And I'll finish with the challenge. Either sign the agreement, Julie, or come out publicly in one of your all staff messages to tell the workforce of the DVLA what is wrong with the agreement and why people are safer with no agreement than signing the one that you know exists. I doubt if she'll respond to that challenge. And if she doesn't, let's make sure that we build and go from strength to strength. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for all of that. I'm conscious of the time, so we need to wind out. I mean, somebody does make the comment that DVLA seems to breach numerous legislation. As an example, not putting industrial action onto pay slips, deducting leave for strike action. Is all of this being looked at by the PCS legal team? Thank you again, PCS, for all your hard work. And I just want to reassure that person, it doesn't have a name attributed, but I just want to reassure you that we do take legal advice at every stage of all of this. So everything we do is sort of guided by our lawyers. But I just want to make a couple of points in closing, really, because as Mark said, you know, last time we balloted, not the ballot we've just had, but the one before, we did only beat the ballot threshold by 8 votes. And in a way, we're almost victims of our own success since then. As a result of this campaign, more people have joined the union. The branch is stronger, you've got more members. But of course, the consequence of that is the ballot threshold then requires a higher number of votes to beat the 50% turnout. So I don't think any of us should beat ourselves up over the result. It's clearly not the one we wanted, but it is the case that the union in your branch is bigger, it's stronger, it's better organised, and I've no doubt that given the strength of feeling that exists, that working together we can achieve something on behalf of all of you. And I think really in closing, going back to the point Mark made around our PCS lawyer who said that Julie Leonard's actions, whilst not illegal, were immoral. Well, I don't think that's any great victory, is it? If you're the leader of a big organisation in a site, and actually there's a lawyer telling you that your actions are immoral, that really doesn't, to me, sound like a cause for celebration. It sounds like somebody that needs to reflect very carefully on what's happened, and as Mark says, get around the table to meet us and to reach an agreement that will keep our members safe. So I just want to thank you all for joining tonight and for engaging in this. Clearly, as I say, we've had to, you know, take stock a bit in terms of what happens next. The branch committee will be meeting regularly during this time, and we'll be working with them to support the decisions that are made. And no doubt when there's more to report, we'll want another one of these meetings to come back to you in terms of any developments. But thank you very much for your time. Thanks for your contributions, and for those that sent messages either in advance or on the night, they're all appreciated, and it's great that you're able to feed your views in, and we do take careful note of all of those. So thank you for joining tonight. Please take care, and no doubt speak to you all very soon. Thank you. Good night.